Joining us now is Jon Favreau, former speechwriter for President Obama. He co-hosts the podcast Pod Save America and is also the host of The Wilderness, which is a wonderful podcast about the history and the future of the Democratic Party. Jon, thank you for being here this evening as we try and parse exactly what's going on. I want to draw your attention to a statistic that I was not aware of until this very moment, which is if Catherine Cortez Masto and Mark Kelly and Raphael Warnock all win their races, it will be the first time in American history that every incumbent senator from a party wins re-election, which is really staggering when you think about the fact that going into this, there was one narrative, and there was also the reality that Biden is sitting at a 40%, 41% approval rating. What do you think accounts for this notion that incumbents representing the party are getting reelected en masse across America with an executive who does not have pretty high favorables?
I mean, I think Republicans are nominated lunatic candidates. There was a price to pay for right-wing extremism in this election. And the reason that we saw the results we did is because Donald Trump went around and tried to push a whole bunch of candidates that were as extreme as possible. And he also stacked the Supreme Court with a bunch of right-wing justices who then overturned Roe v. Wade and fueled one of the biggest backlashes in American politics. And because of that extremism, the big question in this election was, will the 2018 anti-Trump coalition turn out? That turned out in the 2018 midterms. We saw record turnout in that midterm. And the big question was, would that coalition still turn out in 2022, even though Democrats held the White House and Congress, even though the inflation is high, even though people are upset about the economy? And it turned out that because Republicans nominated such extreme candidates, and especially in these Senate races, that coalition turned out. And the second thing that happened is independent voters, and especially independent women, broke against Republicans and went for the party that's in power, which almost never happens in a midterm election.
I also think there was a space carved out because the Trump cloud of existential dread loomed so large. There was a space carved out for certain Democratic candidates to talk about the issues that really mattered to voters, whether it was reproductive freedom, whether it was the economy writ large, whether it was health care. We have a candidate who is still running. His name is Raphael Warnock. He's headed for a runoff in Georgia. And Warnock's strategy in this next month is to talk about the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, specifically the cap on the price of insulin for Medicare, his bipartisan work across the aisle, his push to extend health insurance, and to some degree highlighting Herschel Walker's lack of qualifications. Is it effectively this 1-2 punch that Democrats don't have to necessarily talk about Trump because voters are so familiar, and then that leaves them space to talk about the issues that voters actually care about? Or do you think that the Trump cloud is truly the motivating factor here?
No, I think that, look, there is this sort of very online debate about, was abortion and democracy more important? Were kitchen table issues and inflation and economy more important? The Democrats that ran in this election, and you saw it in their ads, you saw it in their speeches, you saw it in what they tried to make news about, they talked about everything. They talked about the issues that were of most concern to people in their everyday lives, whether that was hoping that abortion access would remain legal in a state, whether it was hoping that we didn't elect someone in a state who might overturn the next election, whether it was voting for someone who fought really hard to make sure prescription drug prices went down, or that we invested in climate change and lower energy prices. Like, the problem that the Republicans had is not only were they extreme, they thought they were just going to coast into power based on people being upset with the economy, but they had no plan. They offered no plan for inflation, no plan for the economy, and they thought that they could just run as generic Republicans, and then if people were upset about the economy, that would sweep them into power. Meanwhile, Democrats were out there talking about how they fought against prescription drug companies, how they fought against the oil companies, how they fought for working people. And by the way, they were also going to fight to protect people's freedoms, whether it was freedom to decide when to have a family or the freedom to vote in an election and expect that your vote's going to be counted.
obviously, we don't have any final results on control of the House or Senate here, and we're going to be eagerly awaiting these results as they trickle in. But if you look at what could be happening in the House, right, which was always going to be a very uphill climb for Democrats, the reality is, Trump-endorsed candidates had a bad night, but there were plenty of people who are entering this new class in Congress that are unsavory actors as it concerns democracy and the institutions that preserve democracy, right? I mean, the reality is Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney are not going to be in Congress anymore. And J.D. Vance is. You have plenty of folks who are radical sort of right-wingers that are going to be entering this class, and you could have a House that is governed by a 2 or 3 seat majority it's hard to say, the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. What do you think the implications are for Democrats in a landscape like that, and specifically the Biden administration? How best to gird themselves for the coming 2 years of inquisitions?
I mean, I think that if you have a Speaker McCarthy, and if you have a Speaker McCarthy running what is a very right-wing caucus, and he only has, a few votes to spare, so they're going to sort of wring all kinds of concessions out of him. It's basically going to be Marjorie Taylor Greene running the House. I think the Biden administration and Democrats in general will continue what they just did in this campaign, which is running against the right-wing extremism that's coming out of the House. And whether it's the House trying to take the economy hostage by trying to, cut Medicare and Social Security to lift the debt ceiling, whether it's them trying to shut down the government, whatever they're trying to do, investigations, impeachment. I think that the Biden administration, what their message is going to be is like, look, we are trying to work pretty hard to bring down costs for families. We know that people are upset with the economy. We know that we want to try to bring down costs. We're willing to work with the Republicans on this. They're spending all day doing investigations, worried about Hunter's laptop, trying to shut down the government. And it's going, and as a result, the Republicans are going to look as extreme as they did on election night, and it's not going to go well for them.
Do you think that there's been any lesson learning in terms, there's this talk of the Republicans ready to cast Trump aside because he's delivering losses. But the fact of the matter is, they're not saying we disavow Trump because of the values that he promoted. He's just not winning us stuff anymore.
Yeah, well, of course. Yeah, they didn't disavow Trump after he led an insurrection to the Capitol, but they're going to disavow him when they can't win their races. Either way, I do think there is a possibility that they might learn lessons again, not because they have seen the light, but because they're worried they're not going to win. And look, if you look across the map on Tuesday night, the non-MAGA Republicans in big races ran pretty far ahead of the MAGA candidates, right? Chris Sununu in New Hampshire did a lot better than Don Bolduc. Mike DeWine in Ohio did a lot better than J.D. Vance. So at some point, these Republicans are going to think, okay, in a competitive race, do we want to nominate a candidate that is not an election denier, that it's not an extremist, because otherwise we're going to lose. So they may learn a lesson just because their political survival depends on it, but, too soon to tell.